You are about to partake in a DEADBUG podcast. And this is one of many podcasts that are on Patreon. At last count, over 300, and even more of my films. What's Patreon? It's a subscription service where, as for as low as $1, you sign up and you get access to all my work. I may no longer be over on YouTube much, but I'm always on Patreon. And you can download the shit and do whatever you want with it. Hell, you can even shove it up your ass and play it out of your eyeballs for your friends, if that would bring you pleasure. I'll leave a link in the description. You sick fuck. But now it is time for a different kind of pleasure. A DEADBUG podcast, meaning if you are faint of heart or weak of mind, please move on. Because this is not the place for you. And there are other forms of entertainment that might suit your needs better. But if you decide to stay, I would only ask of you one thing. That is to sit back, shut the fuck up, smoke 'em if you got 'em, and enjoy. It was a hot and sticky night in White House, Texas. You know, the kind of night where you feel like you're sitting in a hobo's underwears, gasping for breath until it hurts. And although the abattoir is over 10 miles away, it carries its stench of death through the thick, steamy air. And it's just after 11 p.m. that a Domino's delivery dude speeds down the street that he has pretty much to himself, drifting from lane to lane, caught up in his tunes. But in his peripheral vision, he thinks he sees his headlights reflect something at the side of the road. Looking in the rearview mirror, he sees something. In Dukes of Hazzard style, he does a U-turn and heads back to what appears to be a large bag, possibly garbage, or maybe clothes. But if it is a bag of discarded clothes, he knows he'll be able to sell them for some smokes to his drug addict cousin, known endearingly to the area as Chester the Molester. As he pulls his car over to the shoulder of the road, he gets an uneasy feeling as the bag that's 50 or 60 feet just off the road seems bigger than what he thought. Still hoping for a bag of clothes, he cautiously approaches the object, or mass as it were. And as he gets closer, he notices a pair of white sneakers. But they're connected to a pair of legs, pointing down into the dirt. And he realizes this bag of garbage was a dead woman. And as he removes the plastic and the garbage that covers her, he realizes that she'd been set on fire, and her clothes were now fused to her body, and her hair had all been burnt off with deep, pus-leaking blisters, and she smells like a bad ham. And although face down in the red clay mud, you can see part of her face, its mouth wide open, its eyes the same, in complete horror, a death mask, if you will, looking like a goddamn religious icon. But the sight and the smell of the blubbery mass is too much for the pizza jockey, and he falls to his knees and pukes right on the spot, inches away from the melted woman's face. It seems the pizza that he'd only eaten 30 minutes before wasn't such a good idea after all. And I guess it wasn't too respectful of him, but I guess it won on purpose. He turns and he runs to his car, fumbling for his cell phone. He calls the cops.
Oh God, Jesus Christ.
And the police arrive. About 20 minutes later, they rope off the scene. Start looking for clues. They interview the pizza delivery boy. And he's as clean as a sole on a cripple's boot. He's got no reason to be lying. And he's clearly distraught. So they take his number and they cut him loose. As they look at the woman's body, they see that she'd been wrapped in carpet. She's heavy set, and there's a quick stop cream of coffee beside the body. Most likely left there after she was killed, because I can't imagine her wanting to drink a coffee while she was being set on fire. And although there's other garbage at the scene, they figure the creamer cup is an important clue, because it looks new, it's barely crumpled, and the only piece of garbage that doesn't look like it's been sitting there a couple of weeks. Possibly the killer or killers brought their own refreshments, and there's DNA to be had. And there's also fresh tire prints in the red clay. And now it was investigators' job to find out who this melted candle was and hunt down a killer or killers, because clearly she didn't come out into the middle of nowheres and set herself on fire while she was drinking a cup of coffee. There are many tales that need to be told. Those of the young and those of the old. Tales of merriment and tales of woe. Those of limerick and those of show. For many which of whose participants may never know. But perhaps there are those whose tales should never be told. And those are the tales of the Shadow. When Brian Cargill was set up on a blind date with his future wife, Kimberly, he had no idea how much that blind date would change his life. Brian was well liked, and he'd been married before and had a daughter from a previous relationship. And although a blind date, a setup from a friend from work, he was still excited to meet someone new. Their brief conversation on the phone, and email exchanges, and pictures sent, Kimberly was just his type. Confident, sexy, a good sense of humor. Hell, who knows? He might get to take her home on that very first night if things go right. And she was a nurse, so she knew her way around the male anatomy, meaning she could probably suck a cock like there were a prize in the middle of it. On the couple's first date, they went and saw a movie, Honey, I Married an Axe Murderer. They both laughed and chatted away. It went well. And although he didn't get her in bed, he got a hug and a kiss on the cheek. And I guess that's something. During their conversations, Kimberly had told Brian how much the Lord was important to her, and for the next date, she invited him to her church support group. And although a bit taken back by the location of the date, Brian said yes without hesitation, although he wasn't a church type of guy. He figured that if he was going to get her into bed, that this was just one of those roadblocks that he was going to have to get past. Show up at church a couple of times a month, squeeze out a few when the priest talked about gook orphans, and say his Lord's Prayer before he eats his McDonald's. Well, it was a small price to pay. Brian showed up early that Tuesday night for his date at the church support group. Poking his head in the door, scanning the room, he couldn't see Kimberly, but there were a whole bunch of geeks and losers. He smiled, nodded his head, pretended he were one of them, but it was difficult, and believe me, I know. I were once banging this girl at church. Her name was Kathleen Tilley. She was 19 years old, long dark hair. Jesus Christ, she was something else, but I guess that's another story, another time. As Brian stood at the entrance, sheepishly waiting and making small talk with some of the attendees, they invited him in to take a seat. A bit nervous because Kimberly hadn't arrived, he took a seat, not wanting to seem rude or standoffish. Then, Kimberly walked into the room, and she gave him a shitty look. And she walked right past him and went and sat at a seat in the corner, the furthest from him. Brian was stunned. I was like, what the fuck's going on? I don't even fucking believe in God, and I'm here at this fucking church with all these fucking losers. And then you ghost me. And some would have said that this is a sign for Brian, Maybe a sign from God, if there is such a thing, that get the fuck out now, Brian. But Brian sat through the whole 2 hours, listening to the shit he don't even care about. All this shit about Joseph begat Jebediah and Jebediah begat Sal. It were hardly an exciting date. And he couldn't even believe that she wasn't sitting with him and that she were ignoring him. The whole 2-hour meeting, he tried to make eye contact with her. And she totally ghosted him, just staring forward angrily. After the meeting ended, when Brian rushed to the front of the line to go grab some donuts, she stormed right past him, said nothing. So he grabbed his donuts and his coffee and chased after her. Clearly, Brian had bought that whole box of condoms for nothing, because she went into him like he thought. Extra ribbed for her pleasure, and he didn't even keep the receipt. Although I don't think you're allowed to return condoms, for obvious reasons. When Brian, clutching his 2 chocolate eclair donuts and his coffee, ran after Kimberly into the parking lot, catching up with her, he asked her what happened. What did he do wrong? She turned to him angrily, and she said it was incredibly rude of him to go into the meeting without her, and it made her look like a fool. And these were her friends, and she didn't want to be made a fool in front of them. Brian stood there in shock, holding his donuts with a bit of cream on his lower lip. What happened to the girl that he had met, with the big tits and the winning smile? Now, she still had the big tits, but the winning smile were gone. And although God were against homosexuals at that very moment, in the parking lot, holding his 2 chocolate donuts with cream in the middle and a coffee, Brian had secretly wished he was a homosexual, because she had a look on her face like she was Satan herself, yelling at him in the parking lot in front of everybody. Brian said, whoa, 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 that were an honest mistake. They invited me in. What am I supposed to do? It was then that Brian realized this was a no-win situation. And he said, fuck this shit, and he turned and walked away. And as he did, Kimberly grabbed his arm, hard, and pulled him back, spilling his coffee on himself again. His whole white shirt was covered with it. He looked like a retard. And then she said, sorry, I'm just stressed. Brian looked at her face and it had softened. There was a slight smile. Then he looked down at her tits. And he decided to see her again. Besides this blatant red flag that this woman was clearly a mental case and a bunny burner. But deep down, when he got past that warm feeling in his pants, he knew something wasn't right. And guys, I know that you can all agree with me. We've all been there. Where there's been a woman who affects us below our belt, but our brains are telling us run. Run. You don't need this sort of shit. If we only had a time machine where we could go forward and we could see what these women become in the future. Nasty and bitter, smelling like cat piss and not sucking us off anymore, then we would just not date them. But unfortunately, no one has invented a time machine yet. Although I have a friend in Newfoundland named Gary Tisserman who says he's invented a time machine, at least a prototype of one, and if I give him $10,000, I'll be in on it. But I'm not too sure about it. I'm sort of weighing my options. Plus, I don't have $10,000. If any of you guys want in on the action, PM me. You know the score. After the next few months, Kimberly and Brian's relationship progressed, and he moved in with her. And in the beginning, they were hot for each other. He would topping her up 3 or 4 times a night. He told his buddies down at the sports bar that when he sprayed all over her breasts, she made him so crazy that he'd forget his name. But it was more than just sex. When he'd have his daughter over from a previous relationship, she would help out and play stepmother. And Brian had back problems from a job-related injury, and Kimberly, being a nurse, was always there to assist him with his pain. And she knew how to suck cock and how to get down in the sack. He told friends he never had anyone like her. She'd make his fucking eyes go cross-eyed. Something that is a valuable commodity in a woman, and he knew it. But after a while, he started to notice a few strange things. Like the Vicodin pills that he took for his back pain. They'd go missing. And when he'd confront her about it, she'd go fucking apeshit and mental. He said her face would turn from sweet to a demon, making him afraid to even ask again, so he just hid his pills. This kitten definitely had claws, but I guess it lent to that passion that she would release in the bedroom. But that same supercharged personality would unload on him when he did things she didn't like. And it was simple things. Things about the house, if he didn't take the garbage out, if he left the toilet seat up. He was living in fear. He told friends he didn't know how much longer he could take it. And when the sex started to dry up, he just figured, this, what am I here for? He figured, take your guard and go fuck yourself. There's gotta be something better than this out there. And it don't involve sitting in Bible study twice a week just hoping to get a blowjob. He believed the good times were now few and far between. And what made it worse is that the temper she had seemed reserved for him. No one else around them seemed to see it. As Brian was about to tell Kimberly that it was over, it was almost as if she had osmosis, because she came to him and she told him that she was pregnant. And Brian was shocked, because Kimberly had told him at the start of the relationship that she was infertile. She couldn't have babies. It was impossible. Now guys, how many fucking times have you heard that? And if Brian had known this, he would have fucked her in the ass or pulled out and come on her tits. But because he thought she couldn't have any kids, he was fucking topping her up a couple of times a night and doing it with frivolous joy, knowing that there were no repercussions. And now, fuck. And although she said she was pregnant, Brian said he still didn't want to be with her. He'd co-parent with her and he'd be a good father, but he definitely didn't want to stick with her. He'd had enough. It was then that Kimberly reacted just how he thought she'd react. The demonic look came onto her face, and she started throwing shit at him and screaming, and she told him that he'd never get to see the kid, but he'd have to pay for him. And she'd drain him for every penny he had and leave him destitute. He knew she had a son from a previous relationship, but the kid wasn't even seeing her, so that brought red flags. When he questioned whether she was lying or not, she waved the pregnancy test in front of his face, gave him the middle finger, and said, "Fuck you." She yelled at Brian, "This is a miracle baby, and I'm going to conceive this miracle baby, whether you want it or not." Again, how many times have you heard the miracle baby phrase from a woman, guys? Always wrap up your little guy, and don't fucking fall for that whole miracle shit. Cause I've got at least fucking 5 little miracle kids running around out there, and fuck, I'm still paying for it. Believe me, they're miracle kids until they want a brand new fucking iPhone. But no matter how much Brian tried to convince Kimberly how amazing it would be to co-parent, she wasn't buying it. So he told her he'd give the relationship another go. At least for his unborn son, he couldn't give up on it. Just a couple of months later, Kimberly told him that she felt like she was a slut because he wouldn't marry her. So she forced Brian to book a church and them to get married. On the day of their wedding, he went into the bathrooms and he sobbed like a bitch. I apologize, I lost my composure, because he knew that his life, or at least the life that he knew, was now over. When baby Jamie was born, 8 months later, there was a brief period of calm, of even happiness. Yeah, sure, she'd put on a lot of pounds and was probably a dose and a half. He didn't care, because he'd always wanted a son and now he had him. And he was able to cope with her becoming a bit chubby. And in the beginning, she was very loving and tender. And she'd reverted back to her old sexual ways, taking it in every hole that he wanted. And it was fantastic. He just had to close his eyes and not look at her and think of someone else. But as their child Jamie grew, so did Kimberly's temper. And it got worse than it had ever been before. To the point where Brian was afraid of her, but he was also afraid for his son. And having a baby, it's natural to have sleepless nights, but this made her temper even worse. And she would fly into rages if he didn't get up instantly, even though he was tired from work. She expected him to stay up all night with baby Jamie. In one particular incident, Brian had just worked a double shift down at the plant, something that he'd been doing more and more of to make ends meet, because Kimberly, she was now a stay-at-home mom, and said she wanted to dedicate her time to Jamie. He came home, he was exhausted. Kimberly was sleeping, so he snuck into the room, tiptoeing. He undressed and quietly climbed into bed as to not disturb her. He could feel her stir, and she turned to him, and she told him that the toilet seat in the downstairs bathroom was loose, and he needed to go tighten it up. And this couldn't wait, it had to be done immediately. Brian couldn't believe it. He was exhausted. He was falling asleep. He said, "Now? It's 11:45 at night. Can't this wait?" Kimberly jumped out of bed and she ripped the blankets off of him and she said, "Yes, now. You're a big, fat, lazy loser and I need you to do it now. I'm fed up with your procrastinating. You gotta pull your weight here." Brian couldn't believe what he was hearing and he answered her, "Pulling my weight? That's rich coming from you, you heifer." And then he screamed, "I'm out of here. I've had enough." And as he turned to walk away, he felt something rip past his ear. And he turned around and she'd thrown a hammer at him. She'd thrown it so hard that it stuck right beside his head into the wall. Brian knew it was over, and he left that night, went and stayed at a hotel. And it was the next day he filed for divorce. When it went to court, it was a no-brainer, and Brian got custody of baby Jamie. Through his lawyer, Brian had discovered that Kimberly were a career whack job, and her own son from a previous relationship wanted nothing to do with her, and that her former boyfriend she tried to run over with a car, and she'd ended up in a mental institution. And despite all of this, she ended up getting out and becoming a nurse, which is pretty fucked up if you think about it, that she's in charge of people and could hold sway on whether they live or die. But I guess it didn't matter, because he finally had custody of Jamie and got rid of her. And in the beginning, Kimberly seemed to abide by the rules of the court as a weekend mother, and there seemed to be no problems, and they were cordial, which is all Brian wanted. But little did he know that she was just waiting in the wings for her opportunity. The sword of Damocles, one may lyrically wax. Because it was when Jamie was 11 years old, him and Brian had got into an argument one evening while watching television. I guess you could suppose it were an innocent argument, but either way, they got into a scuffle, and Jamie fell and hit his head on the coffee table.
Jamie, are you okay?
Not much was said about it, until Jamie went to see his mother that weekend, and she inquired why he had the cut on his head. And when he told her, well, Kimberly went fucking mental, and I guess it was the chance that she were waiting for. And she took Brian to court, and she won, getting custody of Jamie. And I guess you could say from there, it was all downhill. It was later discovered that the affidavit given to the court that Jamie had supposedly written was dictated by Kimberly, and she made it all up to make sure that she got their son. Because with Jamie, she'd also be getting the hefty child support payments that Brian would have to pay. And despite him being the couple's miracle baby, over the next couple of years, Kimberly was able to have 2 more miracle babies from 2 different men, meaning she had 4 kids from 4 different men, meaning she were a 4x4, if you get my drift, and I ain't asking. And she now had custody of 3 of those 4 kids, and although those men being stupid enough to blow their load in her, they weren't stupid enough to stay, and they left, but she was getting hefty payments from all of them. But now, without a man, Kimberly had to take her rage out on someone, so she turned on those kids. The woman, who resembled a young Mama Cass, became physically and emotionally abusive to her 3 sons. For various reasons, if they didn't finish their meals, if they left the television on, they made a mess in the bathroom, she'd throw plates at their heads, she'd beat them, and she strangled them, sometimes to the point of unconsciousness. Kimberly also took to locking her sons up, putting locks on the outside of their door. If they pissed her off in any way, she'd lock them up, refusing them food, sometimes for days. And they weren't even allowed to use the bathroom, and they had to piss and shit in the bucket, treating them like slaves, making them cook her meals, clean the house. And I'm guessing that she eats a lot, so they were probably cooking a lot. It was like a scene from a horror movie, and the boys were terrified. Even if she heard them whispering, she would see it as conspiring, and she'd beat them and withdraw their privileges such as eating and using the bathroom. And perhaps a trick that she'd learned as a nurse, but she would push her thumbs against her children's Adam's apple when she was strangling them, which would temporarily make them black out. When Brian saw the bruises on his son's neck and his son told him what was happening, Brian contacted the authorities. But they did nothing, and they sided with the mother. I guess injustices in the court aren't just reserved for criminal justice. When Brian contacted a lawyer, he was told unless something major happened, Brian didn't have any rights. She was his main carer, and he had to just suck it up and hope nothing really bad happened. But something really bad was about to happen. It was one early Saturday when Jamie and his younger brother were in the living room playing Xbox, and their mother walked in, and she started ranting that they'd left dirty dishes in the sink, and she started screaming. She kicked Jamie and his younger brother. And then Jamie, I guess he'd had enough. This woman who never gave him any love, any kind words, not even a gentle kiss goodbye when he went to school. He lost it, and he picked up his Xbox and he threw it out the window. It was then that Kimberly grabbed the extension cord and she wrapped it around Jamie's neck, and she started attempting to strangle him to death, while his younger brother watched and sobbed, begging his mother to stop, as Jamie's eyes were bulging out of his head, while she repeatedly banged his head off the floor. And although now 15 years old and a strong teenager, Jamie was no match for his mother, who was the size of a baby hippopotamus. And Jamie, for a second, thought he was gonna die. He blacked out, only to come to a minute later to the sounds of his brother crying. He got up and he ran out of the room into his bedroom, and he called the police. But when the police came, Kimberly did what she always did. She played the victim. She said her son had attacked her and that he was lying. And the younger brother said nothing because he was so terrified. And Jamie tried to tell the cops what had really happened, showing the bruises around his neck. But the police never believed him and said if he acted up again, he'd go to juvie. As Kimberly sobbed, pointing to the broken window that Jamie had smashed with his Xbox, as the cops turned their back to her, she smiled at Jamie, knowing that she were fucking with him, and Jamie knew that she would be getting him back tenfold for this inconvenience that he put upon her. And with the Texas piggies looking at the Xbox laying on the front lawn, they told the mother it was clearly all Jamie's fault. Another tearaway teen who was destined for juvie. Then the police proceeded to give him a citation for assaulting his mother. After the police had left, Kimberly grabbed her son by the throat and threw him up against the wall and said, if you ever try anything like that again, I'll fucking kill you. And Jamie knew that she meant it. And now Jamie and his two brothers felt helpless, living each day in fear, trying not to annoy their mother, knowing what would come next if they did. What makes this all more remarkable was that all the boys' fathers had started catching on and reported what they believed to be happening to the Child Protection Services of the CPS. And they did absolutely nothing. Sure, they'd come by and pay a home visit, but she put on a charm offensive, and she said it was just her bitter husbands who couldn't get with her shit, and they were just making false reports. And when they spoke to the children, well, the kids were too terrified. They knew what would happen if they spoke out of class, so they kept their mouths shut. And the thing is that Kimberly was a nurse, so she knew how to hurt and abuse her children without leaving any lasting remarks and getting away with it. She was fucking playing a game, and she was winning. But the worst was yet to come, because it was 3 months later when Kimberly announced to her sons that she was going to work, that about 20 minutes later, Jamie went into her bedroom, as he often did, despite her telling her he must never enter it. Jamie went in there looking for small change, to which he needed if he ever wanted to go out with his friends, so he'd find money in her pockets or in her drawers. And as he entered her room, he opened up one of the drawers, and there was a big black dildo, or vibrator as they're sometimes known as. And as he pulled it out to look at it, he heard a creaking on the floor, and when he turned around, there was his mother. She tricked him. She hadn't been going to work. In fact, she'd had the day off. And now, she attacked him screaming, knocking him down to the floor and sitting on him. As he felt his bones cracking beneath her weight, she started slapping him in the face, then strangling him by applying her thumbs on his Adam's apple. Jamie could feel himself losing consciousness, and she grabbed the vibrator and with her fat sausage fingers, she pushed open his mouth and shoved it deep inside it, till he was choking on the taste of plastic and his mother's vagina. Or pussy, for those of you who are players, as she screamed repeatedly, "Is this what you want? Is this what you want?"
As they struggled, Jamie was able to pull himself free from under what seemed like a massive weight and run from the room, pulling the vibrator out of his mouth and throwing it on the ground.
And went to the neighbors, and he called his dad. When Brian picked up his son and brought him back to his place, he took photographs of his injuries,
most notably the bruises on his throat, showing the pictures to the police and telling him how even she tried to shove a vibrator down her son's throat, exposing him to her dried up pussy juices. And when the case went before the judge, he said he found it disgusting,
and that it was unfathomable that a woman could do this to her own son.
And she lost custody of Jamie, and he was returned to his father, leaving Jamie to think that the bad times were now behind them. But he was wrong. Dead wrong.
After this incident, the CPS started paying closer attention to Kimberly's interaction with her remaining 2 children.
It was a short time afterwards that Jamie's younger brother Luke was taken from Kimberly
and returned to his father, leaving only the youngest, Zach, in Kimberly's custody, which in many ways defies any logic. But I suppose when we're talking about government agencies, there is no logic involved, is there? And now that Jamie was no longer around to take care of Zach, and with Kimberly still needing to work,
she got her neighbor to take care of the 5-year-old. But eventually, the elderly woman couldn't cope, so she'd have to find someone else.
After all, she now had to work. She was no longer receiving those hefty child support payments for 2 of her kids.
It was then that fate would take a dramatic turn, as she enlisted the help of the woman who cleaned her home, named Cherry Walker, who not only had the name of a 1950s burlesque dancer,
but she was also intellectually challenged and had the IQ of a 9-year-old.
Cherry Walker was a rather obese 39-year-old who'd spent most of her life living in care. But only in the last year, she decided she needed some independence, and she'd moved out of the home, and now was making extra money by cleaning people's homes. And Kimberly's was one of those homes. And when the nurse offered the cleaner the extra job of taking care of her child, it seemed perfect for Cherry.
And although she was semi-retarded, Cherry was kind-hearted and good with kids. And she loved Zach, and she would play with him for hours and cuddle him. And I guess because Kimberly was so desperate, she were okay with having a semi-retard take care of her son. And the fact that Cherry couldn't even care for herself and had her own carer didn't seem to concern Kimberly. And for some reason, it didn't seem to concern anybody else, including the CPS. Cherry lived in a small apartment above a laundromat, and she received a government allowance for being retarded, and a carer would come in and visit her weekly, making sure she had food, and I guess she wiped her ass and whatnot. But Cherry also had epilepsy and took various medications to control it. And over time, her relationship with Kimberly and the youngest son grew, and she became the main carer. It seemed like she was more the mother than Kimberly, which I guess weren't that difficult of a feat. People who saw Cherry and the child together said that she treated Zach almost as if he were a doll, putting all the love on her that maybe she had never got because she were retarded. And Kimberly took full advantage of Cherry's naivety and used her as much as she could, giving her very little money. But I guess Cherry didn't care because it was someone to love, someone to care for. But around this time, Kimberly was getting more and more stressed because the CPS were making almost daily visits to her home. and she knew that it was almost certain that she was going to have her youngest son, Zach, taken away from her, because they told her that she was facing some serious child abuse charges, which could mean that she'd lose her youngest son forever. It was 5 days before the scheduled child hearing that would determine whether or not Kimberly could keep her youngest son, that a worker from CPS called Jerry Walker, and she was surprised when she received a subpoena to attend the child custody hearing and testify against Kimberly. Although I'm guessing Jerry was probably surprised by a lot of things since she was semi-retarded, if she farted, discovering her sink is in a shower, burning down her apartment because she left the pizza in the oven cooking overnight. But regardless, she phoned her carer because Jerry didn't even know what being subpoenaed meant. Her carer explained to her that she had to attend, and if she didn't, she risked going to jail, and she had to tell the truth. Or again, she could risk going to jail. Which again, it seems inconceivable that the CPS would subpoena someone who is intellectually challenged and has the IQ and the understanding of life of a 9-year-old. It makes you wonder, how is this possible? And yet, this is what happened. Jerry was terrified about going into a court around strange people, not being near her beloved party, where accidents could now ensue. So she phoned Kimberly, hoping that Kimberly could help shed some light on why she was being called. And although it demonstrates Jerry's innocence and naivety, it was a big mistake, because calling the defendant that you'll be testifying against probably ain't the brightest move. Over the phone, Kimberly told Jerry that the courts were trying to turn everybody against her by telling malicious lies, and the court, they wanted Jerry also to tell malicious lies, because they had it in for her. They wanted to take away her beloved son and leave her childless. And she told Jerry that she'd like to take her out for dinner and talk about it more, and to ease her troubled mind, no matter how limited its capacity was. And although intellectually challenged, she wasn't a fucking idiot, because she felt very uncomfortable about breaking bread with Kimberly after knowing that she'd been subpoenaed to testify against her due to the circumstances that were about to occur. But Kimberly was adamant, and she offered Jerry an extra paycheck if she'd come over and clean her house. After she got off the phone, Jerry called her carer and told her what was happening and told her how she was worried about this. The carer told Jerry that under no circumstances must she go over to Kimberly's, and that she should stay home, not answer the phone, and not answer the door. But it was a couple hours later, around 6:30, that there was a knock on Jerry's door. And when she opened it, there stood Kimberly, smiling, sweet as pie. And she invited herself in. Jerry's apartment was meticulous. She loved cleaning, and it showed. Complimenting the apartment, the nurse told Jerry she really needed her to come over that night to clean her house. Kimberly was a pig. There's no polite way to put it. It wasn't uncommon for her to leave old tampons on the floor, with her son walking into the room with one sticking to his foot, saying, "Mommy, what's this?" She'd leave paperwork from her work on the floor, and fast food containers everywhere, as well as dirty dishes. And there was a constant smell from her cat, whose litter box she refused to clean. One CPS worker said that she thought she was going to faint when she walked into the house because of the overwhelming odor. Now, as the rotund nurse works on Jerry, begging her to come over and clean her place, Jerry still feels uncomfortable and says, "I think I better stay home, Miss Kimberly." But she pushes and she pushes. She says, "I'll pay you whatever you want, and I'll get you your favorite McDonald's." And I guess that was the deal breaker for the simpleton. And at that moment, she forgot what her carer said, and she agreed to go to Kimberly's house and clean it. So Jerry grabbed her change purse, and they left the apartment and headed to McDonald's, only a couple of blocks away. As the duo climb into Kimberly's SUV, Rocking in the passenger seat, Cherry can barely contain her excitement, but becomes distressed when the nurse passes McDonald's, shouting, "I think you've missed it." But the child-abusing nurse ignores her passenger with the mind of a child and continues driving outside the city limits. And now there's silence, and Cherry Walker feels terror in the pit of her stomach because she instinctively knows that something isn't right. It's a muggy, steamy Texas night, and Kimberly drives for about 20 minutes until they're outside of town. There's no one around, just forest on either side of the road. And Kimberly pulls over, and she tells her supposed friend, cleaner, in the care of her youngest child, that she needs to check the tires. She figures they're low on air. Kimberly exits her vehicle and walks around the rear to the passenger side as Cherry sits seatbelted in the front seat, slowly rocking from nervousness. It was then that Kimberly opened the back passenger door, and she took her purse strap and put it around Cherry's neck, and with all her force started to strangle her, while her intellectually challenged passenger was strapped in the front seat, helpless to do anything but kick her legs and flail her arms in the air, kicking so hard she put a crack in the windshield. But Kimberly would not be deterred, and she pulled her purse strap tighter and tighter, screaming, "Die! Die! Die!" And eventually, Cherry obeyed those orders, and her body slumped in the front seat, and she'd shit and pissed herself, and the smell was overwhelming. And you could see a pool of shit forming on the white fabric of the front seat. At almost 295 pounds, Cherry weighed twice the amount of Kimberly. But Kimberly still was able to take her life by her surprise attack. And she climbed into the front seat, and she took perfume out of her purse, and she sprayed it on the fat-retarded carer, hoping to curtail the odor that was emitting from the shit on the seat. She then put her car into drive and started looking for a place to get rid of the body. She found a clearing about 10 minutes away. She dragged the body out of the seat, placed it there, and then she went to a nearby gas station and got herself a can of gas, bringing it back and then setting Cherry Walker on fire. With a smile on her face, knowing that she'd taken care of her problem, with her only regret being that she hadn't put plastic on her seat. And she knew trying to wash shit out of a white fabric was gonna be one hell of a job. It didn't take long for people to notice that Cherry was missing. Her carer, her parents, all contacted the police the next morning when they couldn't contact her. And from there, it didn't take too long for the cops to put two and two together. Cops got a search warrant for Kimberly's house, and inside it they found the same half-and-half creamer cups that they did beside Cherry's body. And they also found her black hair in the passenger seat of Kimberly's SUV. Not to mention a shit stain that Kimberly were unable to wash out no matter how much bleach she used. I guess it's too bad that she killed her cleaner, and forensics linked the fecal matter to Cherry. At first, the nurse denied having anything to do with the murder of her carer and cleaner. But after 24 hours of questioning, well, she started singing like a retard with a Mr. Microphone on Christmas morning, and she finally broke. And she said she'd been taking the retard out for a McDonald's meal, and she had one of her famous seizures, and there was no medication, and she died right there in the front seat, and she shit herself. And Kimberly, well, she didn't know what to do with the body, and she panicked, so she did what anybody would have done. She set it on fire. Well, not first before covering it with garbage, and then setting it on fire. And of course, that didn't cut it with the police. And it most certainly didn't cut it with the jury, who found the nasty, narcissistic nurse guilty of first-degree murder. and she now sits on death row for the savage murder of the retarded cleaner with a heart of gold. And that, my dear friends, is episode 1 of Tales of the Shadow People. Until next time, good night.
Let out the feelings in ya. Give me the sounds you're keeping out. Put down your guard and free it. 'Cause whatever's inside will never leave here. Give me a different flavor. Shake up your need to keep it safe. No one is watching either. So whatever's inside can come and meet us. Let go of everything now. Give me all your demons, baby. Give me all your demons, baby. Let out the beast that's in ya. Give us the scream you're keeping out.